Welcome to Being Curious podcast show, proudly supported by Moss Skin, a UK-based skincare line infused with sea moss. Good morning, Ricky. It's lovely to meet you, and thank you very much for agreeing to come on Being Curious with Counselling Reflections. How are you doing this morning?
I'm all right. I'm busy, as you've probably worked out. I'm always busy, but yeah, I'm doing all right.
Yeah? I am so appreciative that you've agreed to have a conversation with me. And I suppose for those who don't know you and I don't know you, where do you want us to begin in terms of your journey and experiences that's kind of led you up today to here?
It's really, I suppose, begin at the end, really. I'm sort of where I'm at in life.
Begin at the end? Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
in what way? What is the end?
Well, so I mean, obviously, we were in that group chat where you sort of been introduced to me, where I put a little intro, and I can tell my whole story. But I don't, even though when I tell my whole story, it's quite a deep story. I'm aware that I've had a very, very troubled, traumatic, eventful past, etc. And I do tell that story, but I don't dwell on it. I'm never thinking about the past at this moment in time. I'm pretty much always thinking about where I'm at right this minute, because
it sounds like you're very mindful that you can stay in the present moment and you don't tend to dwell in the past. But for those who don't know you, what is the past?
Yeah.
Because people won't know, and this is on audio.
Yeah, no, the past, if we were bullet pointing it, like I did with that little intro, the past is that, I was taken into care at 4 through neglect. That was in the 80s. I'm half Indian, but I look very Indian, so I didn't have a nice time in care. My mum, for all of her love, wasn't a very good mother. She was a drug addict and an alcoholic. When I came out of care, after having not a very nice time in care at all because of the colour of my skin, when I came out of care, she was always in abusive relationships. That ended with sort of an abusive relationship with a racist, which was like, well, why are you going out with a racist? Do you know what I mean? So there's lots of things that sort of let me down, kind of thing. Then I got moved all over London. Then, from women's refuge to women's refuge. Then overnight, I got moved from London to South Shields, which is where I am now, which, for those that don't know, is right up in the northeast of England, outside of Newcastle on the coast. I then, by the time I got here, it was my 5th school in the space of a year. I'd only just started secondary school. So in my first year of secondary school, I went to 5 schools before I settled here. And by then, it had all gone wrong. And the moment I got to South Shields, I started misbehaving in school. I just, the backlash of everything. I started using drugs from an early age. We then got moved on to the roughest council estate in South Shields, which it's one of them. I'll tell you now, as a child growing up on that estate, it's absolutely amazing. We were just feral, about 30 of us every single night. But, do you know what I mean? That was my environment. And then I didn't make it through school. I finally got expelled at 14. My mum was in a new marriage with a guy that wasn't the worst, do you know what I mean? But he wasn't the best. They were alcoholics. And then, I was made homeless just before I was 16, and then I started bouncing about the country, homeless, just moving from place to place. Bristol, Slough, where I'm originally from. I kept going back there. I went back down there when I was 17 and just sort of descended into a life of petty crime, drug addiction, young offenders institutions. So I ended up just always getting reminded. Nothing serious. I never did a look.
Sorry, I'm sorry to cut you, but just so that I can hold on to the information, it is a lot. You've gone and seen a lot. One of the things that we have in common, I grew up in care, and I grew up in a very white area. I think it was just me and my brother in care. So I recognise that when you grow up in systems that don't always, in the 80s and 90s, where they don't accommodate people of colour, I can imagine that would have been a difficult time. And you grew up in Slough as well.
Yeah, the colour thing's always been a weird one for me because I look very Indian. Like my dad was Indian, but I've never met my dad. I'm from a white family. I grew up in a white council estate. All my mates are white. My culture, if you like, is I'm a lower class white British male. That's a culture that I come from, a demographic that I sit in, if you like. But I happen to be very brown skinned. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't. If I'm in a
ask you a question then. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you a question in terms of that? Because for me that's quite interesting. Because I think I can identify with elements of how you grew up in terms of being in all white spaces, and you've kind of said to yourself, okay, although I look like a brown man, my culture, my upbringing has been white working class male. Was you ever curious? Did you ever feel curious about the Indian part of you? Have you explored?
Well, so with that whole thing there that I've said that, I'm from white working class background, that's something I've only sort of realised over the last decade almost. Do you know what I mean? Growing up, there was an identity crisis. I didn't really know where I fitted in. Was I Asian? Was I from a white? I was that sort of. As you get older and you're a bit more confident in your own self, if you like, more comfortable in my own skin, I'm comfortable enough to say, look, I'm of Asian appearance, but culturally, I'm from. I grew up around white working class people. I don't. If I'm in a room for the way I describe it is this. If I'm in a room full of white people, right, I feel quite Asian. If I'm in a room full of Asian people, I feel quite white. So I'm somewhere in between. But, culturally, I'm more comfortable with the white people than I am the Asian people. And it's just, and I've got to the point where I'm like, it's just the way it is. It's no big deal. It's just the way it is because of how I grew up. That's just how it is. And
I'm also recognizing I'm also recognizing I am a black woman from a Caribbean background, and I'm asking you and exploring race with you. But we are much more than just our colour. We're much more than just our communities. Can I just ask you, in terms of when you was growing up, and you also talked about like mum had some difficulties in terms of life partners, but also you grew up and you moved about and you experienced domestic abuse. How did your early childhood experiences impact on the decisions that you made going forward with your life as an adult?
Well, like I said, I'm an open book, right? And I'm in a good place in life now, and I think I'm a very good person, or at least I'm trying to be. But basically, by the time I got to 21, I was a horrible. I wasn't a very nice person, And there'd been a period in my teens where I was, it had gone wrong morally. I'd gone all over the place. I was really aggressive towards everybody. I was always fighting. Get beat up quite a lot. I was only like 8 stone, but that my partner was putting up with hell from me. My drug use was off the scale. I wasn't so much of a drinker back then, but that's where it ended up. But I was a mess by the time I got throughout my teens. As I hit my late teens and my early 20s, I was a mess.
You said, okay, I wasn't a nice person, and I said my curiosity as a therapist, how does that link that part of you that was really struggling and acting out? How was that related to the experiences that you had as a child? Or was it that you just got in with the wrong crowd at the wrong time? Was it that you
I have always said I never fell into the wrong crowd. I actively sought out the wrong crowd. I was part of the wrong crowd. I was naturally, even before everything had gone wrong kind of thing, I was always mischievous. I was always cheeky, in a likeable manner. But, I was always a little bit naughty. Even now I'm still mischievous. I mess about a lot. I wind people up just for my own amusement. So there's always been that side of my character. I just think that, the negative bits of that what got nurtured far more than the positive bits of that. And by the time I hit my teens, now that I could look back, by the time I hit my teens, I think there was just a lot of anger because I was a really bright student. And I, throughout it all, I wanted to do well in school. And I had all these plans that were realistic plans for me, that I was going to either become a solicitor or I was going to either go down the academic route or I was going to go to do drama college or something, but I had these plans and they were real ambitions. And, I wasn't a lazy student, and I was very bright. And then just over the space of, you're talking 2 or 3 years in school, everything had gone. And by the time I was 16, I was homeless. And you're like, well, this is it. Like, my life's just ruined. At 17, I was sleeping rough, and, and it's like, I've got no qualifications. Well, like, how has this happened? From 14, I had grand plans in life. By 17, I was a homeless drug addict. That's 3 years.
Yeah. So what happened in that space? And did the school notice that you were bright? Did they care that you was a bright child? Did they notice that there was things going on for you?
So I've always got a bugbear about this. I did a documentary thing recently, and I always say this, that being expelled from school is the single most destructive thing that ever happened to my life. Period. That's all the abuse, the care system, being thrown out, being made homeless, etc. Nothing has had such a negative effect on my life as what being expelled from school had, because I was 14. It just took away my future. It took away any chance I had. So even if I'd been made homeless, but I had some GCSEs or some A-levels, I would have had some options to get me out of that situation, rather than, by the time I was 16, 17, I was homeless and I had no qualifications, and I had a criminal record. Do you know what I mean? So I had nothing going for me at all. Sorry, I just want to carry on, because it's always annoyed me that when I came up here to South Shields, I started school and I was naughty and I was misbehaving. I did mess around. I wasn't violent or anything, though. I messed around a lot and I was argumentative with the teachers. And they knew that I'd come up here from a woman's refuge in London to a woman's refuge up here. They knew it was overnight, and yet I just never seemed to get cut any slack. It was, school from the moment I started school up here, it was a battle. And I won't name names because you won't be able to keep it on. But I've done podcasts myself with people that, I've forgiven a lot of people over the years, and I genuinely don't hold grudges. But there's a certain head of year from when I came up to school here who gets lauded, the services that she's done to the education system. And I personally think that she ruined my life. Do you know what I mean? Because every day was a battle from the moment I got there. And it's like what you're saying. I look back now and think, why was nobody grabbing a hold of me and saying are you all right? How's your life? We know how you've ended up here.
Isn't it? Because I'm listening to you, and I was a connections personal advisor. So I worked with young people. So there's lots of questions that I have. In my head, I'm thinking, well, you are under the age of 18, under the age of 16. There's a lot going on at home. Was you a looked after child? Yes, initially. Did you stay as a care leaver? And why did you not get a leave and care service? That is my kind of head where I go with this.
Even when I hit my teens and people asked, when people were being housed at 16, 17, if they'd been in care, when I was mentioning that I'd been in care, it just didn't seem to register with anybody, because I hadn't been in care since I was 9. So it just seemed to be that, oh, well, that was in the past. It doesn't matter now. And it's like, well, actually, I spent nearly 5 years in care as a child. Do you know what I mean? And it just, there's a few people like me that just seem to fall through all of the cracks and don't really tick any boxes. Do you know what I mean? So, we would look for housing, and it would always ask about my ethnicity. But it just seems that my ethnicity never got taken into account because I'm not classed as Asian. It's just, I feel this really weird void. And my
it feels like, from your point of view, the systems around you that protects children let you down, in a sense that no one really asks you the questions what's going on for you. Given that you had gone from London, Slough, up to kind of northeast, it feels like they didn't give you a slack, or they didn't recognise it was trauma. They didn't recognise your acting out was, if you look at adverse childhood experiences, they didn't take into account of that.
It's just bizarre. So when I was 21, I finally, it was the last time I got arrested, actually. I was 22. It's the last time I got arrested. And the solicitor, solicitors do their job usually. They just, they do what they do. But he seems to take a real interest in my life. And, he wrote out the pre-sentence report, and we went to court. And he was pointing out, he was saying, he got sent to prison for his first offence, pretty much. And he was stealing food when he was homeless. And then, he did the full report about my whole childhood and was saying, what is going on? Why has nobody stepped in here to give him any support? And he actually asked for a long-term probation order, which is what I got. I got a 3-year probation order. And the reason being is he was saying he needs some structure. Nobody's helped him. He's literally gone through all of these systems. And it's just, nobody seems to be really actually paying attention to it. He just comes in. Do you know what I mean? So probation, I was just turning up, tick a box, go. Not really how are you doing? Are you homeless? Oh, how can we help with that? Do you know, it's really weird. I just seem to have fell through the cracks.
Do you think if you was in the south of the country, do you think you would have got different treatment? Was it the fact that you was a person of colour that had dual heritage? And I wonder, when you then think about the age that you were and the time that you were, we wouldn't have known about adverse childhood experiences, but there was enough there in literature to say to people, actually, children who come from troubled backgrounds, whether there's addiction, domestic abuse, whether there is intersectionality and marginalizations, they will need additional support. What was it about South Shields and the area that you grew up? Or did the council, your local authority around your area, not have enough resources to care?
I don't know. The only answer to that question is I just don't know. I don't know. Because Vivian and Slough, it never really got paid attention to. I just don't know. Yeah, it's just I just ended up in this really weird place where I was constantly in trouble. It felt like everybody thought that I was just all right. It's so bizarre that I've never benefited, if you like, from any of the sort of things that are in place that help people that have been in care. That's all there really is.
But it's interesting, you had this one solicitor that saw something in you that really is quite extraordinary. How did that one person impact your trajectory or where you went next?
So what had happened, right, is that it was something else that changed the trajectory, and he sort of added to that. When I was 21, I started doing things like the Fairbridge course, which was all outward bounds activities for inner city kids that were getting into trouble, etc. Right, and I did Fairbridge, and then they got me involved with a thing called Rally International, which is mainly for gap year students. But out of 120 odd people that go away and do these 3-month expeditions, there was 22 of us that were from inner city area, where we'd been subsidised by mummy and daddy paying for the gap year students. So I'd ended up on this thing in Africa when I was 21 through probation, basically. And I went to volunteer in Namibia for 3 months. And while I was out there, I became friends with one lad in particular called Alex, who was a privately educated, very, very posh. And there was a group of us that all became really good friends, and we're still friends now. And it's one of the girls, Katie, who went to Oxford University. She's helped me set this up and everything. So all of a sudden, I came back, and when I came back, I was hanging. Those 2 or 3 of them happened to be coming up to Newcastle University. So all of a sudden, my whole circle of friends changed. And I had 2 lives where I was still homeless, hanging around with all my mates that I'd grown up with. We were all a bit rough around the edges. But I was also hanging around with a group of posh students, and I was going to all these parties and just, living a sort of student lifestyle. But, and then what happened is I got drunk I punched the bus driver. It was the last time I ever got into trouble. I went to court and my friends came with me, and this solicitor came out and he'd met me before anyway from being, in that system. But he saw suddenly that I was with, if you like, a bunch of posh students. And he was like, who are these? And I was like, these are my friends. And then he started talking to them. And I think what was different is he said, like, what's happened? And one of my friends, Paddy, just said to like my solicitor, he was like, we're all really disappointed. Like, and I'd never had that before anyway. And this solicitor was like, he started asking everybody, what do you do? And they were like, oh, I'm studying zoology. I'm doing this. And I think he just suddenly realized that I was quite bright and that, I'd been caught up in this system that I was trying to get out of. And he sort of, and, in his speech in court, he was like, his friends were at the back, they're zoology students. They're this, they're that. He was like, he's trying to get out of this life that he's been caught into. And then he started mentioning the care system. He was mentioning, all of the things growing up. And, he was a solicitor, so he was being theatrical, but he was saying he's got this rage inside of him from having his life ruined, basically. Do you know what I mean? And we've got to get around him. And instead of keep sending him to prison for short-term things, right, or just punishing him every time, then he was saying it's gone backwards. He's never had a long-term probation order. He went straight to young offenders. So then after that, he was just getting remanded all the time. And he said, we've got to try and put some support around him and a bit of structure. And he was suggesting a long-term probation order. And that's thankfully what the judge did. They gave me a 3-year probation order.
So really,
I had somewhere to report to every week.
The system, you needed structure, and it's interesting that you kind of said, I have some hypotheses as to why maybe you got a harder punishment than your peers early on in your careers, because when you kind of look at the research around probation, Black and Asian young people get longer sentences and harsher treatment through the court. So there is a bias within the system, and that's quite well documented within there. But there is also something about the system when you get the right people at the right time, a judge who's kind of smart enough to know, I'm going to give this lad an opportunity to kind of show us with the support of what I've got at disposal, some structure, that you also was bright enough to take the opportunity as well.
Yeah. I mean, that bus driver thing was me being really, really stupid. And, even I was like, what am I doing? Do you know what I mean? Like, my circle of friends have changed. All of a sudden I had a different outlook on life. I'd just been to Africa for 3 months, which changed a lot. I opened my eyes like, there's a whole world out here, isn't there? Do you know what I mean? And also, I'd worked towards getting to Africa, and then I got to Africa, which was the first time I'd worked towards something and got what it is that I was working towards. So, that made me realize that, I can sort myself out here. And I just, it didn't escape the solicitor's attention that I was with a lot of very, very academic, posh students that were my friends. Do you know what I mean? They were my friends.
Because at that point, you haven't got GCSEs or CSEs, I assume. You haven't got O levels or A levels. So no. How did you feel being amongst them? Did you feel comfortable in that space?
Yeah, so it's one of those things that I worked on pretty. It gave me a lot of confidence in life. The fact that not only with Alex but with his parents, I would go down to theirs in Reading and I would be sat around the table, and I quickly realised that intellectually I can sit with pretty much anyone and join in a conversation, and I've got something to add, and I'm not overawed, and I'm not looked at as any less intelligent. I don't feel any less intelligent. So yeah, it probably made me realise that I'm quite intelligent. Without the qualifications, it made me realise that actually, although I didn't have the paper certificates to sort of show that I'm an intelligent person, clearly I was, because of the company that I was keeping. Because you don't tend to hang around with people that aren't similar to you.
I also wonder, Ricky, in terms of intelligence, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at other parts of the world, like in Africa and the Caribbean, agricultural intelligence is just as important as intellect. Being street and being aware and being practical is just as important as having, a bit of paper that says that you can complete tasks and write an assignment.
Yeah, definitely. So I've always been fairly streetwise, which is a thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like what you were saying is a thing. I've got friends. I've only got a few friends that I will take to any kind of situation that I'm in, if you know what I mean. Any kind, like, well, no, it's right. I've only got a few friends now, which is what happens as you get older. Your circle of friends seems to get smaller, quality gets higher. But I meet some people and I'm very good friends with them, but I wouldn't take them everywhere.
Tell me about that. What's going on there, Ricky? Why?
Well, do you know,
because some friends and can't take them everywhere.
So I've got some friends that are maybe a little bit too soft-natured to take to some of the harder-natured areas where I operate in. Do you know what I mean? Where if someone's trying to sort of jive at me and rib me and make me look stupid, I've got the sharpness to say something back. And I'm comfortable in that environment, but I've got some friends where I would have to stand up for them or something. Do you know what I mean? Or where I feel like I'd have to stand up for them. So, and it's the same otherwise. I've got, some of those posh friends of mine, but I couldn't take them everywhere that I go.
I think it's vice versa. I think there is a skill to be able to kind of be in different spaces and be adaptable. And it sounds like you have a skill. I just want to move on your story because I know that you went into the army or in the army, and I'm interested.
No, so I went into the Royal Navy. So
Royal Navy, okay.
Yeah.
Why
so I'm in the army
Navy then? Because I don't know anything about the forces or anything like that. So why did you choose?
I got really fit. That was the big game changer. Is that when I was 27, 28. So what I'll quickly skip through. Like my mum, we had a very sort of rocky relationship. She committed suicide when I was 24, and then I went back down south, and then I sort of regrouped, if you like, and I came back when I was 28 to the northeast. And by this point I was starting to hold down jobs longer. They were never very good, but I was starting to hold down jobs. I lied my way into call centers and things like that. So I wasn't washing dishes anymore. I was doing like clerical work, which really didn't suit me. So I never held those jobs down, but I was working most of the time. And then through a charity, I went into a boxing gym at 28, and they were doing a weekly boxing circuit. And slowly but surely, I became really addicted to it. And then I took up boxing training just per se and started going to different gyms. And within a year, I was training like 5-6 times a week. And I carried that on for a few years, and I was really, really fit, and that changed a lot of things as well. And then when I was 31, just various things, not being able to hold down a job, etc., I knew my criminal record was spent. I knew that I had to do something really quickly to sort my life out, otherwise I was going to be in the same space forever. So I just went into the army careers. I spoke to the army. I was 31. They made it clear that I would be frontline getting shot at. I didn't really want to do that, so I spoke to the Navy. I'd always fancied the Navy anyway because I like travelling. Spoke to the Navy, had a very, very frank conversation with them about my history. And the guy that I was talking to, I got really lucky basically, because the guy that I was talking to was just like, right, Sam, I'm going to try and get you in. He tried to get me in. I got in 6 months later, and you think that all the rest of the things that happened to me changed my life. Joining the Royal Navy changed like everything. Like everything.
Tell me why. Why did it, given that, thank you for sharing about Mum, because I know that a lot of young people that kind of grew up in care and experience addiction, and there's a lot of young people now experiencing suicide, either have suicide ideation themselves, or their parents have committed suicide. So I really want to kind of acknowledge that you were able to share that. But
yeah.
I'm also not wanting to kind of move on too quickly. But how did the Navy change your life? Because there's lots of things I can see when you were moving towards change. What was it about the Navy?
They paid me, right? I had to get out of bed every single morning or I would get arrested. So, I had to go to work. You had to give a year's notice to get out. So I was stuck, and then within 6 months, they gave me a house. They put me through for my driving lessons. They fed me 3 times a day. Do you know what I mean? It just, they challenged me. There was the sort of discipline, structure, routine, all of it, just everything that I've been missing in life, all of a sudden, all in one go. And then, so it was probably within about a year, they then, once I'd got out of all of my training, they then gave me a 2-bedroom house. And then they put me through for my driving lessons, and all of a sudden I had a driving license. And it's why with this next thing, and this isn't me just doing a shameless plug, it's why I'm focused pretty much on practical support only, because I'd gone off and done various courses and whatnot, like challenging offending behaviour. I'd done lots of things in life, but nothing changed my life more than just practical support and just being expected to do stuff, basically.
So the question I was asking, I can imagine that the idea I'm going to go into the Navy and the reality of the first few months, what was that like? Because I can't even imagine what that was like for someone like yourself.
No, so it's I think that I was far more equipped than a lot of the younger lads. I was 31, right? Sorry, I was 32. I just turned 32. I was as fit as a fiddle. I'm trying to get back there now. I was as fit as a fiddle. So when I turned up, there was no danger that was a problem. The fitness had really changed a lot about my confidence and the fact, the sort of intellectual thing that I'm talking about. Even though I hadn't had very good jobs, I was very sort of sure of myself at that point as well. That changed a bit over the years through alcohol. But at that point, I remember when we got to course, there was just nothing that fazed me, absolutely nothing. There was no part of me thought I was going to fail. The fitness stuff I breezed through. I was quite cocky in that, they would give us a timetable of what stuff we had coming up training wise, and with the younger lads to give them a bit of confidence as well. I would just be looking and I would joke, be like, oh, so I bet I'm quality at that, and I'd look down and I'd be like, I bet I'll be good at that, I bet I'll be good at that, so it just, I knew it was a game. So there, the person, the petty officer that took us through course was a bit of a bully, to be fair, and the younger people would always be like, why doesn't he like me? Why doesn't he like me? And I would always say to them, it doesn't matter whether he likes you. He's not your friend. Do you know what I mean? Like, we get through this, you're never going to see him. And he worked out pretty quickly that I wasn't bothered by him shouting at me and stuff. Like, I knew it was a game. I wasn't intimidated by him, but at the same time, I knew that he had a job to do. So, yeah, I breathed through training, absolutely breathed through it. And then when I got into the Navy, again, I was really comfortable in that environment for a long time. And after you do your initial training, you go off and you do your sort of core training for the role that you're going to do. And that was down in Cornwall, 22 of us living on a landing in 6-man rooms. I think it was about 10 months worth of training down there. I would probably say that's one of the best periods of my life ever.
What was it about that experience that made it one of the best periods of your life, do you think?
It was just one in all in, do you know what I mean? It was just a group of people all in the same place, partying, the training sort of aspect of it, all learning together, and then on the night time, all socialising together, partying, fighting with each other and things like that. Do you know what I mean? It was I think, it was like 10 or 11 months, and probably the best 10 or 11 months of my life was my initial
and was it
training.
Like family? Did it give you a sense of feeling like connected? And I haven't asked you, have you got any siblings? Have you got brothers and sisters?
No, so I'm an only child. So yeah, I'm an only child. I wouldn't say family, but there is that sort of, it was a team. It's like any kind of team sport. We were going through something together, and you form little packs and stuff with certain people, and it's one of them. I've left now, but when you bump into somebody from that period of time, even the people that I didn't necessarily get on with during that period of time, when we see each other now, we're pleased to see each other because we went through training together. Do you know what I mean? We got shouted at together. You know, we on a night time we were out drinking together and stuff and bonding. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, I loved it. And then,
what was it like to leave? You said that you'd left now, and
I had I'd absolutely had enough by the time I left the Royal Navy. I was done. You know, I was miserable. It had come to an end. I stayed a little bit too long, which I'm pleased about, rather than leaving a bit too soon. I'm pleased that, you know, I'd had enough. I couldn't get promoted for various reasons. But even so, I'd had enough of deployments. I had no job satisfaction with what I was doing. I'd started doing projects outside of the Navy, which were getting bigger and bigger and showing that I was quite capable of doing something else. And by the time I left, to be fair, you know, senior rates and officers were saying to me, you've got to leave. Like, you've got to go and do something else now. It's time for you to go and, you know, like create something, hence the Hoodex thing that I'm doing now, which is like my third or fourth project.
So tell me about Hoodex, or tell me about the projects. It sounds like you were always entrepreneurial. So what were your early projects then? No,
I was never entrepreneurial. No, I was never like that. All that happened again. It's the Navy. I was in the Navy, and you always get tasked off with things. And somebody said to me one day, "We want you to go and help this officer plan your squadron families day." And I went to see this officer, and he went, could you get some children's entertainment? And he was talking about like a clown or something, and I came back with like a fun fair, and he was like, what? And I was like, I've got this like sort of like place that's going to come out, and they pitch up like a go-karting course, and we've got a sweet machine, and I've got a children's entertainer, and I've got this and I've got that. And he was just like, how have you done that? And I don't know, I started asking people. I started being asked to organise things, and everything I got asked to organise, I organised to a higher level than what I was supposed to be. And then I then took it upon myself, and it was a little thing. I said, right, I'm going to do like a charity raffle for the Cornwall Air Ambulance, because that's where we were based down there. And again, usually people do these charity raffles, and they've got a few sort of little bits of prizes, like a meal out or something. And by the time I finished, I had like £8,500 worth of prizes. And the top prize was 3 nights in a 5-star hotel on the Isles of Scilly, plus flights there and back. And the officers were like, how are you doing this? And I don't know. I just do it. And then I moved up to Somerset, and my next posting, there wasn't a soup kitchen anywhere that I could volunteer at, because I wanted to do something on the evenings. So there wasn't a soup kitchen I could volunteer at. So I sort of accidentally created a charity called Haven, which again became a soup kitchen. I was doing outreach work. We were supplying tents and stuff, and sort of flying all over the place. I was drinking really heavily at that point, and I just got away with that before I handed it over to somebody else to run from the area, because I think that it was about to all implode and become a bit of a disaster through my drinking habits, my ego. It went from being about the homeless people, because I was homeless, to I remember there was a point where, you know, I was like daydreaming about me walking through Yeovil town centre and everybody loving me because of like I'd set this charity. So it all of a sudden became about me, but that was also to do with my ego through drinking, etc. And then I left there. I left the Royal, and that was it. Suddenly, all of a sudden, I was very good at setting things up. Still no entrepreneurial spirit. And then when I left the Royal Navy, I got approached by a national charity. I won't say their name. And a guy that runs that charity with an OBE, I won't say his name either. And I went into that charity, and I set them a shop up in Newcastle, basically just on a mad one, if you like. I had their charity number. I found them free premises in the city centre. They were used to poking little shops outside of town. I got them somewhere right in the city centre of Newcastle. We were making good money, but then they stopped sending me stock, so I had to go and source my own stock. Then I worked out that they weren't doing anything for charity, so I was like, we're not sitting around doing nothing. We're all going to go to the gym and box together. I ended up with a bunch of sort of young offenders in there, just because I got talking to them and they all wanted to get involved. It turned out that charity was bogus. I think they've just gone bust. The guy with the OBE is a flat-out con man. That is criminal. He's probably the most dishonest human being I've ever met. But from there, this was the only time it became entrepreneurial. From there, when it was all over, I was really ill. I'd lost my car. I was $3,000 in rent arrears. So I bailed. I was in a really bad way. I was on beta blockers. I was on sertraline. Essentially it kind of ruined my life. But then all of a sudden I was like, why set all of that up? Do you know what I mean? And all I had was his company number. So I just registered my own company and started off on a market stall, trying to replicate what it was that I was trying to do for them. And because of
that evolved into Hoodex. So I just want to stop you there, because there is so much there. One of the things that's coming up for me when I'm listening to you is about going back to, like, you started drinking. And did you start drinking? Was you drinking during the time when you was in the Navy, and it got worse once you left?
I drank forever. I drank really, I drank from my early 20s. I drank all the way through my mid 20s. Even when I got really fit, that was when I haven't really got a problem with that part of my life. I got really fit. I was training most days. I was drinking and smoking most evenings. It was a great period of my life, to be honest. I didn't suffer with hangovers. I was as fit as a fiddle. I loved to party. It was all good. I got into the Navy. The training sort of died off. The drinking took over. So, I've been an alcoholic since I was a young man, but I got away with it. And by the end, I wasn't getting away with it anymore. I was in a really bad way. My ex-partner had put up with years and years of just alcoholism. So for the first few years of our relationship, she put up with loads of abuse that I carried on from what I'd seen growing up. Then, I stopped all of that. But even after that, even though we had a nice life on paper, I was drunk every night. And that really spiraled out of control towards the end, when I suddenly, so even when I was drunk every night, I drunk enough to not have hangovers in the morning, etc. I drunk and would go to bed at a reasonable time. By the end, I was sitting up till 2-3 in the morning. I was drinking like 2 bottles of red wine. I was doing school night. I was doing 3 bottles of red wine, plus beers, plus swigging out her vodka at the end. And I had to get sober, which wasn't easy. And
how long have you now been sober?
It's over 3 years.
Wow.
So and that's now
down to Ricky, because I work with clients who describe themselves as alcoholics. Just in anything that I do in terms of working with people who are struggling to change, what was it about this time round that helped you to change your life? Is it a combination of steps that you've been making throughout your life that's enabled you to change?
I've been trying to get sober for about 5 or 6 years. Do you know what I mean? So I fessed up to the idea that I had an issue, that it was a problem, that, there's 1 or 2 moments, epiphanies, if you like. There was one up in with the Navy up in Rosyth, and I just woke up one morning. It's probably the only time I've ever felt like this, to be honest. I just suddenly thought, I'm losing like this battle that I'm having with alcohol, like I'm losing it. And, throughout all of my troubles, I never felt like I was losing. Do you know what I mean? I always had a bit of hope, but all of a sudden I was like, no, this is beating. I'm going to end up dying an alcoholic. So there was that. There was the epiphanies. I was going to AA and stuff. It was a combination of things. And then the final thing was I read a book. I got 6 chapters into that Alan Carr, he does the Stop Smoking Now books, the easy way method. And I got 6 chapters into his one about stop drinking alcohol. And, I put the book down and I didn't stop drinking straight away. But I said to my wife, the next time I stop drinking, it's going to be the last. She obviously didn't believe me. But I'd read enough in the book to realise that I was not having a good time. Like there was no positives left from alcohol anymore. I wasn't missing out on anything. I was drinking on my own anyway. And then I woke up after a really bad binge over the space of 24 hours. I was drinking in the morning. I woke up to a bottle of wine that I bought for myself from room service in a hotel. Couldn't remember buying it. I put it next to my head, ready to wake up to. And then when I woke up, I looked at it and just thought, "Hey, mate, you're an alcoholic." Do you know what I mean? there ain't no getting away from this now. And I drank that bottle of wine. I thought, right, I'm drinking this bottle of wine. And then, I drank that bottle of wine on February the 10th. Weirdly, my mum's birthday. And I woke up the next day and it was during lockdown, but there was one Alcoholics Anonymous group that was open. Where was I? I was in Taunton. And I was working in a hospital for COVID with the Royal Navy. We were supporting them. It's just mad how things like this happen. There was a nurse there that had worked out I had an issue and made a point of saying she was doing something that Friday night. And I was like, well, what are you doing on Friday night? You can't be going out. Everyone's on lockdown. And she said, I'm babysitting my kids, my mate's kids, while she goes to Alcoholics Anonymous. And she suddenly saw me just go, how's there an Alcoholics Anonymous open? And she said, there's one open. It's in Taunton. It's like an hour's walk from your hotel. She'd worked it out. And I was like, yeah, I think I need to go to that. So I walked there. And then, my big thing had been that I'd stopped drinking for 6 or 7 months at a time and convinced myself that therefore I was all right and I mustn't be an alcoholic. And then I'd start drinking again, do you know what I mean? And I went there. And the first person that spoke was this Sikh guy with this bloody regal turban on and everything, looking really majestic. And he just, the analogy that he said, which I've always remembered, he just said, like, if you lock a tiger in a cage for 6 months and feed it vegetables, when you let it out of the cage, do you think that it's a vegetarian? And I was like, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. Like, and it just, everything just added up to me realizing there and then on the spot that I couldn't drink anymore. One, I couldn't drink anymore, and two, I'm not missing out by not drinking anymore. So that was the last time I drank.
In terms of it, wow, that's just really powerful, and it's almost like timing. The fact that you kind of was able to do that on your mum's birthday as well, and not necessarily kind of be conscious, not kind of conscious about that. But I think also, Ricky, in terms of like the journey that you kind of gone through, there have been periods where you stopped for like a good portion of the time. And I think, and then...
I stopped twice for 6 months. No, sorry, I stopped once for 3 months, and then I stopped for 6 months. When I stopped for 6 months, the Navy also put me on hand abuse. So I was, had I really stopped, or was I just been forced to stop? I hadn't sort of consciously, there was no point where I decided I'm not going to drink again. It was always like, maybe I'll take a break and then maybe I'll be able to drink normally and stuff. But the last time I stopped realizing I can't ever drink again. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I can't go and have a pint now, because if I have a pint now, even if I went and had a drink tonight and it didn't end up out of hand, it would be the start of a downward spiral that ends up with me just drinking myself to sleep every night. So... yeah, and it was rubbish. It's rubbish. Like, it's such a rubbish. Like, I wasn't having a good time. Drinking's rubbish. Drinking's crap. Yeah. Like, I don't enjoy it at all. I don't miss it.
I'm mindful of the time that we have left, and I want you just to briefly kind of talk about, Hoodex in terms of why it's needed. Where can people go? What you're going to be doing in the future? Why now? All the whys, yeah. I don't mind doing another one of these if you want us to do another one where I will somehow get a bit more structure and peace and quiet around me. That would be wonderful if you do have time, because I'd appreciate that.
If you want to just sort of use this as a sort of notes kind of thing, I do apologise. Maybe a bit more than I can chew. So basically what happened is, while I was also working at that bogus charity, so that was one element of the charity sector I was in, I went and I got a job at a hostel that I used to live at in Newcastle. And I saw that hostel life from the management side. And, that hostel was run by a registered charity, and they had 75 residents in there. And for each resident, they received £1,500 a month in benefits. And I was like, well, why is it costing so much to live here? And they were saying, well, that's to pay for the support because it's supported accommodation. And, by this point, because of the Navy and everything, I was like, well, what support are they getting? And they were saying, we pay for staff like the key workers. And, I pointed to, they had an occupational therapist that they were paying £26,000 a year who was making Christmas cards with them. They brought in and I don't know where you stand on this, but I've got my own views. They brought in 2 diversity champions, whatever they are, on my second day to do a workshop about racism, where they then started talking about white privilege in a homeless hostel to a bunch of 18-year-olds. So, you know, and I lasted 6 days there, basically, and I was like, you're just pissing money up the wall here on support. And the bit where where we really clashed was when I said, like, you know, there was one lad in particular called Andre who helped me set up Hoodex. He came into the market stall with me, and I got him in the shop. He'd been living in a hostel. He was 24 years old. He was no different to any young lad that I'd meet in a military crew room. And he'd been living in that hostel for 4 years, unable to go and get a full-time job, because if he did, it would cost him £1,500 a month in rent. And I was like, so you've had him here for 4 years, getting £1,500 a month to support him? And they were like, yeah. And then I just said, he hasn't even got his driving license. And they were like, what? And I was like, why haven't you got his driving license? Why haven't you got my CSCS card? Why haven't you got him some work boots? Like, you know, why hasn't he got gym membership? Where's the practical support? And that was sort of, Andre came to volunteer at the shop with me and started coming boxing with me, started living healthier suddenly. And we got right in his ear with some home truths, just saying, mate, what are you doing in that hostel? You're you know. And he was saying, oh, you know, I'm waiting on the housing list for them to. And I was like, well, you just need to chin it off and go and get rented accommodation, because you're trapped, mate, and life's flying by and you're going to end up nowhere. So that's what he did. He left there. He's training to be a chef now. He's doing really well. He's got really fit and healthy. And I just suddenly thought there's not enough practical support out there for people like Andre.
Hoodex is about practical support, but recognising the system that is designed to support homeless adults and young people.
Yeah, it's not homeless. It's mainly aimed at ex-offenders. But you know, that covers a lot of ground. That ex-offenders, or people at risk of offending, which is usually people in recovery. It's usually people with housing issues. And yeah, you come and volunteer at my shop selling hoodies, and then in exchange for that, you have to get fit. That's part of the deal. We pay for like all one-to-one training. We've used the money from the shop to set up a boxing gym that I've shown you. Everybody has to sort of do some physical training and start getting fit and healthy. And then from there, we're going to get people their driving licenses, their work cards, and all the emotional support that they need gets done peer-to-peer, the same as what it did in the Navy. You know, you're told right from the offset, you know, if you're homesick or something, speak to each other. So it's the same, like, you know, if you're struggling, speak to each other, you know. You understand each other's problems better than, and me as well, because I'm in recovery. So that comes naturally, but actually you need practical support. You need a driving license. You need to be fit and healthy before you do anything. You know, and then you need to be working towards getting some qualifications. Then you need to go and get a job. Like, you know, and that's your right.
There's the way that you kind of see it, there's a real kind of practical element. I actually think it works probably really well with men. And I wonder how well it works with women. I don't know if women need something slightly different. But
so with the women, because we've got a few girls together now, what we worked out is, you know, the boxing works really well with young men for obvious reasons. You know, there's the aggression, there's the sort of machoism, the camaraderie as well, though, do you know what I mean? So that works really well with the young men. Even the ones that don't want to spar, they tend to enjoy the training anyway. The girls want to go off and do sort of, you know, spinning classes, and they want to go in swimming and, you know, get fit via that and do circuits. Some of them want to box as well, but you know what I mean? So we're learning as we go. We're sort of separating the two. So we've got joint circuits that we all do together, but then we've got boys sessions where we're doing sort of lots of punch bag stuff. The girls are going off to do bums and tums classes and things like that, well-being.
So I really appreciate your time, and I really want to thank you for just talking to not only me, but others out there who are just wanting to be curious about doing things differently.